Hello, welcome to today's University-Based Child and Family Policy Consortium webinar. My name is Patricia Barton and I'm the Consortium Coordinator. We're excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Research Toward Precision Home Visiting, Making Services More Efficient and Effective for Families. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I want to say a few words about the consortium and about using GoToWebinar. The University-Based Child and Family Policy Consortium is a network of more than 25 university-based institutions, including centers, schools, departments, and programs that have an interest in child and family policy. We are organized around three main purposes. First, to share the latest findings and strategies for conducting policy-relevant research and to facilitate collaboration across our member institutions. Second, to encourage cross-disciplinary undergraduate and graduate training to support the next generation of child and family policy researchers. And third, to foster effective translation between research, practice, and policy audiences. The consortium is run in collaboration with the Society for Research in Child Development and hosts a number of webinars each year on a variety of topics. If you're interested in learning more about the consortium, having your institution join the consortium, or if you would like to join our listserv, please see the information on this slide. Just a quick word before we begin about the technology we are using today. We are using GoToWebinar to host this webinar. All of the attendees are muted. If you have questions for the speakers, please use the question box on your screen to submit them, and we will get to as many as possible during the moderated Q&A at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded. After it ends, I will be uploading it to SRCD's YouTube channel, and we will share the link with all registrants. Please feel free to share this link widely. And now I would like to turn things over to Dr. John Korfmacher to introduce today's topic.
Thank you. I'm John Korfmacher, and with my colleagues Matthew Pose and Ann Duggan, we are going to be talking about precision home visiting. Go to the next slide. So what we're going to do today, I am going to introduce the organization that we're all part of, the Home Visiting Applied Research Collaborative, and talk about its research and development platform. We are going to define precision home visiting and show how it can be used. Matt's going to focus on that, and then Ann is going to provide an example of using innovation towards precision home visiting. So my goal is to set the stage for Matt and Ann, so I want to provide some context and some background. Oh, and that's my joke there. All right. Yeah, I'm glad you went back to it. HARC started as the Home Visiting Research Network in 2012. It was funded by HRSA as part of MCV, the Federal Home Visiting Initiative. We were one of four big initiatives, the MyHope Randomized Controlled Trial, the HV Coin Quality Improvement Initiative, and then the state and tribal level evaluations of home visiting that happened all over the U.S. Our original goals, which still continue, in modified form, were to develop a national network of researchers and practices, to define a national research agenda, and to promote innovative research to advance that agenda. We had some successes, especially in establishing a research agenda, but our budget was limited, and in many ways we were trying to capture what was already happening in the United States as MCV was rolling out. What we were not really pushing innovative practices to move the field forward. So in 2012, our charge was expanded. We have a new 5-year funding commitment, and we take what we've learned and we're to rethink what we're doing. And so our mission, our mantra, our brand is promoting innovative research to in turn promote and improve precision home visiting. Precision home visiting in a nutshell is service delivery with the understanding of what works best for whom under what circumstances. Matt's going to explore this in greater detail, but this is the basic definition. This is not a new idea, and we asked ourselves initially, is this just pouring old wine into new bottles? And I can tell you, as part of the early Head Start national study over 20 years ago, we were asking these same questions, what works best for whom? But our answers were always somewhat limited because we were focusing on pretty conventional designs. We had correlational studies, post hoc examinations of subgroups that were part of large randomized trials. So the question is, how do we move beyond these methods to intentionally vary how we work with families? And so what's needed is basically a new paradigm. Move to the next one. Yeah, so We need precision for many reasons, and these next slides just kind of walk through these different reasons. Decades of RCTs have taught us that there are effects in different home visiting models, but these effects vary and they're on the modest size. And we know modesty is a virtue, but not necessarily in the context of looking at intervention results. All of the evidence-based models showing modest results are actually very complex. They have fairly intensive visit schedules, and they need all those visits to cover a lot of territory. And then they are also trying to impact multiple outcomes. And these are just the McVie outcomes that have been mandated by the funding initiative. There's many other outcomes as well that other programs that are involved in many different program models. These interventions, however, can't be everything to everybody. So where does that leave us? We need precision because there are multiple pathways to outcomes. Many factors, for example, influence parenting, as you can see here, from historical factors to larger systems, the characteristics of the parent and the child. Consequently, there are many possible targets of home visiting. So where should programs place their investments? Again, they can't be everything to everybody. We need precision because families themselves vary quite a bit within programs. They have their own, they have diverse constellations of strengths and needs. This slide comes from a survey we did of program directors who were in HARC. And this slide shows how program directors identify the needs of families in their program. Even though low income is the primary risk factor, you can see a wide range of family needs as identified by program directors. And we know that impacts vary among subgroups. We know from past and current research that home visiting benefits some, but not all targeted families, and that it is more successful in achieving some intended outcomes than others. And this is just one example, but it shows how treatment effects vary depending on the constellation of depression and relationship avoidance in mothers for child behavior challenges. We also know that home visiting varies in how well it engages families and how faithfully actual services mirror the core elements of whatever model is used. We need precision because we know that program model coherence matters. This is a recent systematic review, and it shows that programs that use a coherent model that links theories to services provided and intended outcomes, it's those programs that tend to have stronger success. And finally, we just want home visiting to be equitable. What can we do so that it is the kids and the families who need it the most who can benefit the most? So, in other words, it's complicated. Home visiting is complex. We know that a one-size-fits-all approach does not address this complexity. We rely too much on the idea that home visitors can naturally tailor services to families to address all their needs, while still following program protocols and showing fidelity. That is a huge ask, and we feel that individualization of services, it should not solely rest on the backs of home visitors. So how can we help programs to tailor services better? So we talked before about why we need precision, but we also need innovative methods too. And precision home visiting is all talk without these innovative methods. RCTs have advantages, but they tend to be unwieldy creatures that often take a long time from first recruitment to actual program reports. My Hope is an example, so was certainly the Early Head Start national study. Some analyses suggest that the average time between research funding priorities and actual changes in practice is 17 years. There are newer methods that have rigor, but they are nimble and they can provide results faster. And that is what we're focusing on. Matt and Ann will both talk about these. These are models that we are promoting in HARC through reports, webinars, trainings, consultations, conferences, and strategic funding opportunities. Our research and development approach has 4 hallmarks. There are 4 key features to our approach. Now, all three of us, Matt and Ann and I, all have basically this figure in what we talk about. So you're going to see this again, and I just want to focus on one important element. We need to do a better job of working with programs as well as other key stakeholders as partners in our research process. We often pay lip service to this. Sometimes we say we will engage partners, but then what we might do is just ask them to review what we've done after the fact as a way to, rubber stamp or essentially give their blessing to what we have come up with or decided. I know from the Heart Council that we use to review proposals that go through our network that it's the program representatives who often have really good insights regarding what is going to be feasible and what is relevant to programs. So we need the voices of our stakeholders much earlier on, so we're not just simply spinning our wheel. We're trying to practice what we preach at our management level. Our National Advisory Council contains diverse stakeholders. I will talk about our membership network in just 1 minute. And but you can see our national representation, and then our executive committee has expertise in research, CQI, policy, program partnerships, and working with the national models. So first of all, a caveat, we're not the only ones talking about innovative practice, and we recognize the irony of being the ones who've come somewhat late to this game and then talking up innovation. But this is a good thing because it lets us learn from, borrow from, steal from other great hives that have been grappling with these issues as well. And we can bring home visiting into the conversation, which I believe is a service mechanism that is in many ways ideally suited for precision, given its one-on-one focus with families in their actual homes. Okay, so partnership. One of our goals is to build and make better use of our practice-based research network. We are somewhat unique in that we do not just invite programs to be part of it. Researchers and networks and state leaders are also part of the network. So we are a big tent. And if anybody listening wants to join and you don't feel like you totally fit into one of those categories I mentioned, talk to us and we will find a way to make you a member. We have a strong nationwide network of programs. They are big and small, urban, rural. They cover multiple models and funding sources. The network is voluntary and free and simple to join. Programs only engage in studies that they want to be part of. Our goals, if you want to go to the next slide, yes, are to develop collaborative relationships between researchers and home visiting programs, to conduct multi-site research, and to disseminate these results quickly and efficiently. Our primary goal is to do good research, but this research depends upon good partnerships with programs, and we want to make our members more active players in the endeavors. And it's not good research unless it can impact practice, so we need to make sure we're accelerating results back to the field. As part of our R&D platform, we're offering more supports to consult and partner and share our learning. We just published our first brief on precision home visiting that you can find on our website. We're going to be offering more opportunities for learning both in person and virtually. One of the initiatives is we want to support research that challenges and seeks to shift current paradigms. So we are supporting pilot studies to help with this process. We want the research to explore novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies. Maybe the use of creative cross-disciplinary or cross-model collaborations, or the application of new conceptualizations to address an existing problem. But we have funding to support smaller studies with the idea that they will lead to bigger studies. I think you can move to the next slide. We want this research to focus on true partnerships with programs. And the other thing that we emphasize is that we will work with applicants to help them shape their proposal. So interested parties must first submit a letter of interest, and we take it from there. If you're not even sure about that, you can email me and I can talk to you about to walk you through even before you submit a letter of interest. Our goal is to give a lot of feedback during the process. And so I think this is a really exciting endeavor that we're engaged in right now. So come and join the cool kids. Please consider being part of our PBRN. You can join for free as a researcher, a program, a network director, a state lead. All it takes is filling out a simple survey to join. You only engage what you want to engage in, and it's our job to find compelling things that you will want to be engaged in. The other thing I'll ask you to do is to follow us. We have an active Twitter, and we use it to notify people of recently published home visiting research. HARC members get a special shout out. So if you're a researcher and you publish home visiting research, we will highlight it and amplify your message. So you'll get the HARC bump. And we have a Facebook page. We are, I will admit, still figuring out Facebook. Programs use Facebook. We know this, and we're it just shows that we're still working to figure out the best way to partner with programs. And with that, I am going to stop, but I'm going to transition or transfer over to Matt, and he's going to talk more about precision home visiting and the methods behind it.
All right, thanks, John. Excuse me. So my name is Matthew Pose, and I work for James Bell Associates. And as mentioned, I'm part of this team trying to work on innovation in home visiting. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We can go to the next slide. So as already was mentioned, the concept of precision is not new. Precision home visiting is informed by a number of fields, but I'm going to focus just quickly on precision medicine and precision public health. We learned a lot about the methods that were used to advance these fields, and so we pulled from those without actually pulling from the medical model. So I'm going to go ahead, we can go forward to the next slide. So precision medicine is an evolving strategy for disease prevention and tailored treatment that considers an individual's genetics, lifestyle, and exposures. It's often described as an approach to overcome reductionist medicine, which presumes that all patients with the same signs of disease share a common pathophenotype. In other words, everybody has the same disease and therefore should be treated similarly. So in the same way that we know that with medicine, not the same treatment works for everybody, that there are different treatments needed for different diseases, and that things that look the same may not actually be the same. We know that that nuance can be amplified many times over again in a scenario like home visiting. The kinds of social issues that we face in our lives are much more complex in many cases and require a much more refined approach. We can go to the next slide. So one of the examples we'll use from medicine where there was a major advancement that is indicative of this precision medicine movement was in lung cancer. So prior to 2004, so let's first define cancer. Cancer is any disease in which a mutation in cell causes the cell to grow uncontrollably, either reproducing more quickly than normal or losing its mechanism for cell death, leading to a clonal population of cells expanding out of control. Prior to 2004, lung cancer was looked at as essentially one disease, and it was caused by long-term exposure to airborne toxics, and that led to multiple random mutations. It tended to occur later in life. This is what was thought back then. As a result, all treatments were non-specific. They were all fairly toxic, and in the case of lung cancer, all of limited efficacy. They didn't work very well, and they didn't help people all that well. Then in 2004, there was a major advancement in cell biology that led to the identification of a driver mutation, an oncogene that drives hyperproliferation, of which the cells reproducing at a very accelerated rate. And so the first one targeted EGFR, epidermal growth factor. And so a drug was created that could target that, and it tended to only kill the cells that contained EGFR mutations and nothing else. At this point, as of 2016, nearly 70% of lung cancers have had an identified driver mutation. So the key takeaway here is that at one time we looked at lung cancer as one disease with one cause, and there was only one treatment, but the one treatment didn't work very well. On average, it was better than nothing, but that's about the most you could say. After 2004, a deeper understanding of how cancer worked led to a major change in how we understand and treat lung cancer, and so it's allowed this to become a much more treatable disease. All right, we can go to the next slide. So let's go back to this notion. What is precision medicine? If you click through, you'll see some things will show up. All right, there we go. So it's an evolving strategy. So evolving, prevention, lifestyle, and exposures. Now, the reason why I've highlighted these if we go back to the earlier definition where we mentioned genetics, I think a lot of people would find that the notion of trying to differentiate how we work with families based on their genetic makeup is a little fanciful right now. There very probably are things in our genetics that would help us to better understand how to work with families, but our level of understanding there is not where it needs to be to even consider such a thing in becoming more targeted in something like home visiting. But using an approach that's evolving, that's flexible, that's focused on prevention and looks at lifestyle and exposures, things in our environment, are things that make quite a bit of sense. So we can go on now to precision public health. So there's another aspect to home visiting that we need to think about. With precision medicine, the focus is on the individual patient and on the treatments that work best for specific individual patients. With public health, we're generally focused more on communities. But for the same reason that all patients aren't the same, in medicine, in public health, all communities are not the same. And so the needs of the community differ. So precision public health is something that is more a population-based approach, and it seeks to identify community differences in target interventions. The idea here being that you look at what the community needs, and they get what's needed based on certain factors. So it focuses on prevention, early identification, and surveillance. This really isn't that different from our notion of public health in general. The key difference is how data is used and analyzed in order to identify very specific interventions that would work best in those communities. And that isn't such a popular topic right now, but it's evolving. We can go to the next slide. So this is what is precision public health, which I was just talking about. We're going to kind of get into a little example here, but I wanted to point out this picture. It's an Apple Watch. When I put this up here, one of our other speakers, Duggan, wrote back and she goes, "Oh, I love all the pictures you put in, but I have no idea what that watch is about." So I'll quickly explain. I think one of the major hallmarks of precision public health is the use of big data. And big data is really this idea of having really large, almost in the moment data, or in many cases it is live in the moment data on a very wide-ranging set of information about an individual. So, it may be things like their physiology, what's going on in their body. It may be where they're located, their environment, all sorts of things connected. It could be education, life stress, you name it. And once we pull all that data together into one system, we start analyzing it using modern and sophisticated algorithms, we can start to make informed predictions about what's going to happen to that person in the future. And we can do that at an individual level, but we can do that also at a community level and find out what's going on in communities and allow us to target and head off crises before they happen. The Apple Watch is an example of modern technology that may help move us that way. So there is, stay back where we were. So there's no universally accepted or codified definition of precision public health, but here's a definition that's nice. Precision public health is the application and combination of new and existing technologies which more precisely describe and analyze individuals and their environment over the life course to tailor preventive interventions for at-risk groups and improve the overall health of the population. All right, we can go ahead, move forward to the next one. So how do we apply precision approaches to prevention science? Well, I think that there's some key points we want to look at here. We want to embrace variance and unpack the black box. So in many cases, when we're looking at the effects of treatments or interventions, we are treating what's going on with these families as something somewhat universal. And we create treatments that are themselves a collection of many different approaches, really many different interventions in one to try to address the particular set of outcomes for these families. And what happens is that we get, in the end, from the study, a net average effect for these families. But we don't really know, other than maybe some theories that we had developed at the outset, what it is in that intervention that caused a change in the outcome. And in some cases, our theories are actually so poor that we really have no idea what we found. And so that's really difficult. If we start to develop more specific theories, and we start to pay attention to the fact that average effects are only useful to a certain extent, but better understanding how we can improve outcomes for individual families, what works for whom and under what context, requires that we look at the variance. Why is it that some people are not doing well? Why is it that some are doing even better than average? And so by understanding that, we can make huge strides. So go to the next one. By focusing on what is different, we can learn what is the same. So one of the things that sometimes is hard in these black box evaluation scenarios is that it really is unclear what's going on. If we start to look for differences between individuals and study how those lead to differential effects of an intervention, one of the things we'll find are where there are no differential effects. And so as we start to see that certain characteristics of individuals have no effect on the outcome, we can start to understand what key components of interventions are universally helpful for all people versus those components of interventions which really are specific to certain types of people. Go to the next one. And if we embrace technology, we can make breakthroughs. So one of the things that's really started to happen in the last, let's say, 10 years, although I suppose arguably technology has not exactly slowed down or sped up in any recent time, but there's been some changes in technology that have allowed miniaturization, for instance, of data collection devices. They've allowed more advanced statistical models. Computers have become faster. All of this has made it so that we can start to do things today we couldn't do 10 years ago, and we certainly couldn't do 30 years ago. So by embracing this technology and looking at how it's improving other fields, we can start to make bigger breakthroughs in our own fields of research. So now we're going to go into the research guidelines and methods that we use. So one of the key ideas here is that we wanted to understand how we could change the traditional approach to research and to start to achieve our goals with this approach. So the standard model of evaluating interventions, as I said, looked at services for the average family. And what they would do is they would tell us the effect for the average family. And if it was significant, we would say, great, we have an effective intervention. And we really didn't pay attention or care about the people that were at the fringe. So if we go to the next one of the things we really want to do is unpack these interventions and start to study families more specifically. And so by using designs which specifically study subgroups, now one of the things that I want to mention here, when I say specifically study subgroups, I don't mean that you take a standard randomized controlled trial that happens to have a lot of data about the types of people that were served, and then after the fact do post hoc analyses of subgroups. There's a number of problems, including biases that can introduce into the analysis. It's also not very efficient because we're not testing how different intervention types can work with different types of people. All we're doing is seeing how different types of people statistically responded to the intervention with those biases in place. So what we're suggesting is that there are approaches you can use that rather rapidly allow you to study simultaneously at the same time how different people respond to different interventions. And we can do this in a way that helps us to really understand what works for whom. We can go on to the next one. So as John said, this is something you're going to see. I'm going to go through all of it. But this is part of our basic hallmark. So it's critical to understanding this approach and seeing our terms. So we focus on active ingredients, focus on what providers should do in working with families and one another. So active ingredients is a really core idea. I think that we all have ideas about what the active ingredients of our interventions are, but when you really start to delve into specific things you can measure, which can be then used to predict changes in an outcome, I think we find that things get a lot fuzzier. It's a lot more difficult to understand what it is in our interventions that are specifically responsible for these changes, and then trying to think about those in very logical terms. Go ahead, that's fine. Working as partners. So one of the other problems with traditional randomized controlled trials, besides the fact that they tended to test things on average and they didn't really have a focus on active ingredients, was that they often didn't bring in the families and the home visitors, the programs themselves, into the fray. And so it became difficult to translate that research into changes in practice that were necessary. The other potential problem, though, of course, is that the research itself could be misguided. There are aspects of what's going on in the practice setting that may not be understood by the researchers. And so the design was developed in a way that made sense based on what the researchers understood, but was not in fact true of the real world. So by including these people, we can really change and improve our designs. In fact, I think that there are ways to give up minimal rigor in a study while maximally including these partners to make these designs much more appropriate for their needs, basically able to better meet their practice needs in the moment. We can go to test the next one. So another problem, as I mentioned, is that there are these old-fashioned study designs that we traditionally use, and there's no denying that the traditional randomized controlled trial is the gold standard for efficacy and effectiveness. But one of the problems is that they are very slow, and there are ways to have the exact same level of rigor as a traditional randomized controlled trial that actually allows us to test more efficiently. So by efficiency, we don't necessarily mean quicker. Many of these studies still could take years, but their advantage would be that at the end of the study, we'll have actually learned a lot more about what works for whom, because we would have tested different variations of an intervention for different subpopulations that we theorize would respond differently. All right, we can go to the next one. And define and measure explicitly. So it's really important that the things we're measuring, the active ingredients, the mediators in the intervention or moderators, and the outcomes are measured in very specific and direct ways so that we know what it is we're measuring, but also so that we minimize potential noise in the analysis, which could lead to essentially false findings. All right, we can go on. So our continuum around active ingredients has a certain progression that I think is important. We have theorized active ingredients. That's kind of where we generally start out. These are things which are theoretically justified. They're supported by past research, but they've never been explicitly tested. They often are informed by stakeholders. This is the first step, the baby steps phase. The next part of this, where we start to really take off, is the evidence informed. This is where we begin to empirically establish associations. So there are things like randomized controlled trials or other experimental trials that have been done which allowed us to create causal links to a point, but not necessarily directly to the active ingredient. This may be something where it was tested as part of a set of ingredients in an intervention, and that's as far as we got. And then there's evidence-based. This is where we have directly tested those causal links between a specific active ingredient and the outcome. The research framework is simple, and this is something that we have made sort of a hallmark of our approach. So we have the intervention active ingredients, and that has a relationship to the mediators. That's the action theory. So between what it is we do and the short-term changes we expect to see in families. That short-term change is actually should be causally and directly associated with an outcome of interest, something that takes longer usually. That's the conceptual theory. So the intervention is what we do to try to change something like behaviors in the individual. Those behavior changes then lead to improved outcomes for the family. Action theory, conceptual theory. And our approach is basically trying to be very explicit in measuring and testing all of this. Okay, go to the next one. So looking at some very specific methods that we think are going to be helpful for this, I'm going to just quickly go through a couple, but there really are just hundreds that probably could apply. So pragmatic trials, this is the idea that in the past, we really were focused more on using terms like efficacy and effectiveness, and those terms were science-y, and I think sometimes they were misunderstood or used in different ways. And so there was a sort of rebranding, if you will, of the concept of an efficacy trial to really say, of an effectiveness trial. This is not just about does it work on a large scale so much as does it work in the real world under real world conditions, and trying to make the findings of the study, which are often very nuanced and ambiguous, something that is of greater utility, where it's directly understandable how this study is leading to practice or change in practice. And it's gone far enough, we're going to hear from Anne about this, that we even have some ways of measuring this. Okay, next one. Rapid cycle evaluation. So this is something I'm really excited about. Rapid cycle evaluation is basically the idea that we are trying to analyze something quickly. So we're trying to understand how something that we're doing for an intervention is leading to a change in the outcome, where we can detect those changes on a fairly rapid basis. Like we're talking weeks, days, weeks, maybe months, but definitely not years. And this allows us to tweak interventions and get a better sense of really what works for whom by testing different approaches. To do this, though, requires unique ways of studying that are not necessarily what we usually do. For instance, we need to use things like surrogate endpoints. These are these proximal mediator endpoints that we would measure, which happen to change very rapidly in response to the intervention, are causally and directly linked to the outcome, but they themselves are not the outcome. All right, we can go to the next one. So Bayesian adaptive trials are another exciting research method that we think holds hope here. So these have been used quite a bit in cancer research and medicine, and it may actually seem like these are way out there. I mean, they basically use genetics as a way of differentiating how people will respond to a particular treatment, and then you take advantage of that knowledge as a way of targeting treatment to improve outcomes. In something like home visiting, though, there is actual application here. We can start to learn what it is about individuals that lead to differential response to the home visiting program. We can take that information and use it to actually give them a different intervention that we have now studied and found works better for them. The method of studying that is efficient and relatively rapid is the Bayesian adaptive trial. It makes use of Bayesian inference, which allows us to use an algorithm to predict where to allocate individuals in the treatment arms of the study, as well as to make predictions with high confidence of whether they're going to be ultimately have success in the outcome. This allows us to rather quickly figure out what interventions work for which people. Okay, we can go on. So how do we get from here to there? Well, one of the things is I've just gone through a couple of what I would call heady intervention methods that we aren't really there yet. And so to move us forward, one of the things is we need to have vision and creative research interests that allow us to ask new questions. We then need to basically take that problem and walk ourselves backwards into the steps that need to be taken today to get there. And so these are the kinds of things that I'm looking at, and I hope all of you will find interest in these methods and feel the same way. If we want to do a Bayesian adaptive trial, or we want to be able to start carrying out rigorous rapid cycle evaluations, then we need to do things like identify what these surrogate endpoints are going to be and how to measure them. We need to start to think about our conceptual models. We need to think about the action theories. And we need to start to delineate those in a way that we can really study them. And that's all from me. So we're going to hand this over now to Anne.
Great, thank you, Matt. My role in this webinar is to take the general concepts that John and Matt have been describing and to present a concrete example of how we're applying these principles in the context of a specific project. And I'm going to be focusing on a project that is taking place in New Jersey and in Maryland. It's about a 3-year project, and it focuses on family goal planning and on testing and intervention to improve family engagement and home visiting by improving how family goal planning is used as a part of services. So I'm the person speaking, but I'm speaking on behalf of many, and I've listed the organizations involved both in New Jersey and in Maryland. We can go to the next slide. So in my part of this webinar, I'm going to focus on 2 aspects of the project. First, what led us to design this project, and secondly, how we're using features of innovation toward precision home visiting to accelerate our learning of what works best and for whom. So first, focus on what led to the project. There were studies in both New Jersey and in Maryland, and to focus on the study in New Jersey first, excuse me, we did as part of earlier work in New Jersey, we did a longitudinal study of about 150 mothers. And right at the time that they enrolled in home visiting, excuse me, we ascertained why they had enrolled. Hold on just one moment, please. Okay, finally better. And what you see here are the percent of mothers who said they enrolled to improve their parenting, to get someone who would be more supportive to them, to address issues of mental health, to access benefits, to have greater access to primary care, and to address goals that were important to them regarding their work or school. And what you see is that, and there were other reasons as well, but for these 6 that I've listed here, over half the mothers endorsed each of these reasons. So mothers, you can see that mothers didn't enroll just to improve their parenting per se. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see of those mothers who endorsed each of these reasons, what percent said they were satisfied with the efforts made by their program. And what you see is that the mothers were more likely to be happy or satisfied with the efforts made to improve their parenting. Only about half or fewer were satisfied with efforts for the other areas. So clearly huge opportunities to improve service delivery, at least as judged by the families enrolling in home visiting. Next slide. As part of that study, we also looked at mothers' assessment, their rating of how well they were aligned with their home visitor in terms of the goals they were to address. And we also looked at how long they remained enrolled in home visiting. And what we found was that mother satisfaction with services was in fact positively associated with how strong they rated their alignment of goals with their home visitor. And that goal alignment was also positively associated with how long families remained enrolled in home visiting. Now, focusing on the right-hand side of the slide, we also knew that for the models of home visiting that are used in New Jersey, that includes Nurse Family Partnership, Healthy Families America, and Parents as Teachers, goal planning is actually a core part of all 3 of those models. But when we surveyed home visitors to find how they would rate the support that they received in order to fulfill that aspect of their role, we found that only about 58% of supervisors reported that they themselves had been trained in how to support home visitors around goal planning, and that sizable hold on, guys. There we go. That nearly a quarter of the home visitors had not, actually over a quarter of the home visitors had not been trained in goal planning, and that nearly half of the home visitors felt that their training could be improved. We also looked at the actual policy around goal planning, the extent to which the management information systems that were used by these programs made it easy for home visitors to do this part of their job, and the extent to which continuous quality improvement efforts in both states, in New Jersey, actually focused on goal planning, and we found areas for improvement in all of those as well. Go to the next slide. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what had happened in the state of Maryland leading up to the current project. Early on, when Maryland got its first competitive home visiting award from HRSA, we surveyed program leaders on how they rated the competence of their staff to address sensitive issues like mental health, substance use, and healthy relationships. And what you see is a very small percent actually rated the staff as being very or extremely well prepared to address these issues, even though, as John had showed in an earlier slide, these issues are highly prevalent among the families who enroll in home visiting. So clearly an area ripe for improvement. Next slide. So built on those results, Maryland had conducted a randomized trial of home visitor training around motivational interviewing and the stages of change in an effort to improve their skill in addressing the sensitive issues like those I showed on the previous slide. And to cut to the chase, what we found in the randomized trial of that communications training program, we found large, immediate, positive impacts on home visitors' communication knowledge, attitudes, and skill. But we also found substantial attenuation of those impacts in just 2 months. And I'm going to give you some examples. Go to the next slide. Okay, here you see follow-up 1 for knowledge, attitudes, and confidence. These are the effect sizes. So these are the differences between the trained and the control home visitors in terms of each of these 3 outcomes. Huge effect sizes. The immediate follow-up 1 was carried out right after the home visitors in the training group had completed the training. Now let's look and see what those impacts look like just 2 months later. Serious attenuation, somewhat in the knowledge, more so with attitudes, and the differences between trained and control home visitors was non-significant 2 months down the line. How about looking at their actual skills? This will be the next slide, please. And for this, you notice at the bottom, we say motivational interviewing adherent, non-adherent, expressions of partnership and empathy, and avoiding labels and stereotypes. These measures are derived from coding of video recordings of home visitors interacting with standardized mothers. And we used an instrument called the MIGHTY, which was designed specifically to assess the extent to which the principles of motivational interviewing are apparent in actual interactions between a provider and a client. So what you see is right after training, we have substantial improvements in all of these for the trained home visitors versus those in the control group. But 2 months later, next, attenuation of all of those so that the only one that remains significant is home visitors' recollection of what not to do when communicating with mothers. So New Jersey established the need for improvements in our implementation system for around family goal planning, and the trial in Maryland demonstrated that training alone was just not going to cut it. That led to the project I'm going to describe. Next slide, please. And it's called the Goal Plan Strategy, or GPS, to help families find their way through to goals that are important to them in home visiting. And the intervention itself has 4 parts: improvements to the management information system, training, continuous quality improvement, and then the 4th element, which we're testing via a randomized trial, coaching to augment that training. So, and our overall research question is, what is the value added by coaching in terms of goal planning practice? Next slide. Great. So essentially, the randomized trial portion of this is being conducted in New Jersey. There's another more qualitative study being conducted in Maryland, and I'm going to focus on the study in New Jersey, where essentially across all sites in the state, we take baseline measures of visitor and supervisor practice and factors for how they practice around goal planning. Then we randomize these 60 local sites to either get the training plus the MIS plus the CQI, or those 3 things plus coaching. And then we do interim and follow-up measures of practice, factors for practice, family engagement, and family satisfaction. Okay, next slide. Now, the reason for my telling you about any of this was to give this as an illustration for how the way that we've carried out this project so far really incorporates the features of innovation that Matt and John had talked about earlier. And if we take the first 2 principles, the focus on active ingredients and working as partners, the points that I really want to make there are that we realized early on that the active ingredient of goal planning itself was not really well defined. So while originally we were focusing on the implementation system, we actually had to redefine policy itself. The existing policy was very good at defining when a goal plan was to be designed and when it was to be revisited, but it was very loose when defining how a home visitor should work with a family in defining and implementing a goal plan. So our first task was for stakeholders to redefine that policy. And so what that meant is that program leaders, program supervisors, frontline home visitors came together to redefine the policy, to make it more coherent, to make its underlying theory more explicit, and to more fully define its active ingredients, such as motivational interviewing. Then second, we modified our research design to make it more efficient. So here I'm focusing on the second 2 principles of our initiative, define and measure explicitly and test efficiently. As I'll describe in a little more detail in the next couple of slides, we've modified some aspects of our study, our randomized trial, to make it more of a pragmatic trial rather than a test of efficacy. Second, we've added explicit observational measures of coaching and goal planning practice. And third, we purposefully have defined a subsample of 100 home visitors to test specific home visitor characteristics that we believe will be moderators of how well they participate in the coaching and in the impact that the coaching has on their goal planning practice. Secondly, we are purposefully selecting a sample of families for each of these visitors to test maternal characteristics as moderators, both of goal planning practice and the impact of changes in goal planning on family engagement. Next. Thanks. And so in so doing, you see, like echoed here, the slide that Matt had shown earlier. Our intervention is the coaching by the supervisor. We believe the home visitor's reflective capacity will moderate the impact that coaching has on goal plan practice, and our conceptual theory is that the changes in goal plan practice will lead to changes in family engagement. Next slide. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've moved more in the direction of a pragmatic trial. And here what you see in this diagram, there are 9 spokes or 9 aspects of study design which relate to the pragmatic versus explanatory nature of a study. And we would rate our study as pretty high. That is, you see red circles toward the ends, the outermost ends of each of these 9 aspects of study design. And very quickly, I'll just mention what these 9 criteria are, 9 aspects. The first at the top, eligibility criteria. Who is selected to participate in the trial? To the extent that the study includes everybody, it is a pragmatic rather than an explanatory trial. The second, how are participants recruited into the trial? To the extent that procedures follow usual practice, you have a pragmatic trial. The setting, where is the trial being done? In our case, it's being done in all sites, not a select subsample of sites. Needed expertise and resources, or the organization. The intervention has been designed to be something that could be easily transported to other sites outside of New Jersey, if in fact we find that coaching is effective. Flexibility in delivery and in adherence. Again, 2 aspects of how much we allow participants to carry out their jobs using their own discretion versus following very, very tightly controlled protocols. Follow-up, how closely are participants followed up? Here I've departed a little bit from what might be considered ideal. We are gathering a wealth of data. We are trying to do it in really unobtrusive ways, and in so doing, to mimic real life. But we are audio recording coaching sessions and visits, and that is in itself a little bit of a departure from real life. Then the relevance of primary outcomes. We know that the outcomes we're looking at are highly relevant for program staff, leadership, supervisors, home visitors. Where we probably could have improved on this is to make certain that the outcomes that we're measuring would be the ones considered most relevant from the viewpoint of families. Something for us to work on in the next study. And then analysis, we will in fact be using all data, not limiting analyses to home visitors or families. They get, we'll call it a full dose of this intervention. So we designed the study to be highly pragmatic. Next. Great. What we're hoping for are some 3 main types of benefits by designing the study this way. First would be easier dissemination of the coaching strategy should we find it to be effective. It's already designed in a way that it should be easy for our programs in New Jersey to implement it, and therefore easy for other programs around the country. Second, the study incorporates a test of whether and why coaching might work better for some visitors than others. And also, number 3, a test of whether the resulting goal plan practice is more useful for some families than others, more effective in engaging families strongly. Next. So I think we just had 2 concluding slides before we take questions. Thank you, how to get a hold of us. And then is there one more? And then finally a notation of our sources of support for the work that we're reporting here. So that's it. I think we're turning. Yeah, John, it's going over to you now, right?
Yes. Is it possible to go back 2 slides just to show? Right. There we go. I just want to encourage everybody to go to our website, check out the materials that we have to offer. I believe we have about 5 minutes left to answer questions that people might have. We did receive a couple questions in advance that I can lead with. One of the questions is we received a question, are there cultural adaptations to home visiting that are being tested? Anne, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Well, I'll give a partial answer anyway. So cultural adaptation is a a widely recognized and important issue confronting home visiting right now. So there's lots of work around the country, although right at this moment, I myself cannot give any specific examples. I would say, though, that when we're thinking about cultural adaptations, I think most of us think about race or ethnicity. And I also think that we really need to go beyond that as our definition of culture. To expand our thinking to concepts like literacy, immigrant status, social connectedness, relationship security, family preferences regarding shared decision-making, and so on. This is where I myself see some really important work ahead. Families prefer to interact with visitors in different ways. We didn't show any slides on that, but I can tell you that we know that to be the case from surveys we did at around 20 sites using all different models around the country. Some families really like shared decision-making. Others prefer to have home visitors take the lead. We need to be attentive to that.
And I would just add that I do think one of the fundamental questions, I think we could apply, I think this is an area where we could apply precision home visiting concepts, but it does depend on how clearly we can operationalize what exactly we mean by different cultural groups, so that we could think through what kinds of adaptations would be needed. Another question, I'm just looking at the time. One of the questions we received, how are family goals translated into specific and measurable, discrete, or combined transactions of service? And again, Anne, I'm going to ask you about that one because I think that does relate to the project you just talked about.
Yeah, I think that's really at the heart of that project, right? The visitors are going to be coached to be more skilled in eliciting those family goals, in helping families to translate these broad goals into achievable objectives, and to making a focus on those objectives a part of every visit. The coaching is aimed at improving the home visitors' skills in observing and responding to patient concerns and cues regarding the goals, and to be able to deal effectively with families who maybe prior to this have never had any experience around goal planning. It's just not something that they do. So that actually is probably the major focus of the coaching that will be done following the training.
Great. I just see in the chat box we have I think we have time for one more question, and we've just received a question. Has anyone been using single case research design in this capacity? Matt, do you know of anybody, do you think single case research design can be used for precision home visiting?
Thanks, John. Yeah, actually, this is one of the approaches we've been looking at. So what I would say is that single case designs in a traditional sense lend themselves to precision home visiting because they, by nature, have to make use of rapidly evaluable outcomes. The endpoints themselves need to be something you can assess quickly. But there are some advancements in single case design that we've been looking at, such as idiographic clinical trials, ICTs, and we will have a memo coming out that will describe what an ICT is. But basically, think of an ICT as a single case design that uses a multiple baselines approach, but then for the analysis is actually using a multi-level growth curve model as the means by which you would analyze that data. So it allows for a much more nuanced analysis of the data. And so, what makes a precision in this case would just be how you apply it. The approach works, but there certainly are ways to apply it that are not consistent with our thinking.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. Is there thanks to our host for allowing us to talk. Is there any kind of last minute messages that we have to give?
I have one thing. Just on our website, we have audio recorded talks on all of the methods that we've named and others.
Oh yeah, please check those out. And then Patricia, anything you need to say before everybody hangs up?
Yeah, just a very quick wrap up. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today, especially thank you to our speakers for such a thought-provoking presentation. If you liked today's webinar, you might be interested in future consortium webinars. So please check the consortium listserv and website for information about upcoming webinars. And if you would like to present on a webinar later this year, please see the information on this slide or follow up with me. As I mentioned earlier, you can join the consortium listserv to receive notifications about future webinars, a quarterly newsletter, as well as job and event announcements. I will be sending around a follow-up email that will include a copy of today's slides, as well as a link to the webinar, which has been recorded and will be posted on SRCD's YouTube channel. Thank you again to everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.